Services Marketing, MKT 625. Lecture number 26.
Assalamu alaikum Khawateen wa Hazrat. Wasim Hassan welcomes you to lecture number 26 of Services Marketing MKT 625 at the Virtual University of Pakistan. We are talking about the service design, its importance in terms of having the right standards so that we really can come up to the expectations of our customers and minimize the gap, which is known as gap number 2. So in other words, we still are in the process of learning as to how to minimize that particular gap. I did talk about the strategic process in terms of developing a service, and the areas which I covered in the previous lecture are overall business strategy development and service strategy development. We have a few options that we can exercise in order to come up with the right service strategy, but then there also are some points that we have to take into account as kind of a planning checklist to make sure that the service that we have developed is just about the right service according to the expectations of our customers. The checklist is divided into two major groups. The one is what you may call the front-end planning, and the other is about implementation. The significance here is that of planning very accurately, because unless planning is absolutely accurate, implementation is going to be erroneous. And in order to keep implementation from being erroneous, we've got to be extremely correct in planning our moves. The first step, as you will recall, is about generation of an idea. Once we have generated the idea, we get down to the next step, which is service concept development and evaluation. After that, we get into business analysis, which is very much like we carry out an exercise for tangible goods. We collect information about costing, we get into pricing, then we get into profitability and all other related financials to come up with the right projections, just in order to see to what extent the service that we have developed is feasible. We also look into the implications in terms of the HR strategies. If we need further hiring, we go ahead with hiring new people. We train them. If we need to just train existing staff, we get into internal and interactive marketing and so on and so forth. After being done with this step, we are done with the first portion of the checklist, which I told you is front-end planning. The next phase is that of implementation, and the very first step in implementation is that of service development and testing, as against concept development and evaluation, which we learned as part of the first portion of the planning checklist. This is the first step of the second portion of the planning checklist. And just like we learned the importance of putting together all the features as kind of a strategic outline in the planning process, here we translate all those features into small steps which are very detailed and which must be dealt with as itemized points in relation to all the functions of the service, meaning the marketing function, operations, supply chain, the administration, the financials, and so on and so forth. Anything which is a part of the whole process must be reflected as an itemized point, which is translated from the overall strategic features which appear in the document that we prepared in the very first stage of planning. It is very important because every service is a new service. Even a service which has been redesigned appears like a new service because there are certain steps which were not there in the past and which are the ones that we have to take into consideration after the redesign has occurred. So therefore, we have got to be extremely mindful of the completeness of the whole process, meaning we must not leave anything to vagueness. And like I told you in the previous lecture, it has to be very precise and it has to be very objective. Let me give you one example about service development and testing in order to substantiate the concept that I've just talked about. Just imagine for a while that we are into restaurant business, and the business is all about the dine-in service, meaning people come to the restaurant, they sit inside, take the food and go away. This is the one process. Also imagine for a while that we have offered another service as kind of an enhanced feature of the overall business, and that is going to be the feature of direct delivery, meaning that we are preparing ourselves to start delivering food at the place of the work of our customers or their residences or wherever they like. In order to do so, we have to come up with a service design which matches the requirements of the customer. And since everything has got to be customer-centered and customer-focused, we've got to look at the whole process from that particular standpoint. Now, one way of looking at it is that we have to document and then translate everything into itemized points of the whole process as a complete the process detail flowchart. And the other option that we have to ourselves is that we look at the whole thing in a very simplified manner. And by keeping it oversimplified, we can say, well, it is just a matter of receiving the order and delivering it from the kitchen to the place of work of our customer. Well, that is something which I would call oversimplified and incomplete, because there are so many steps that we have to consider in order to be very precise and accurate. So the other way, which really should be the way of moving as professionals in services marketing, is that we divide all those activities which we envision taking place right from the start of the receipt of the telephone call to all those tasks that we think are a collection of the whole process. So let us take a look at the more organized way which we should follow, or rather we must follow, and that is, upon the receipt of the call, the person receiving the call will communicate the order to the kitchen. And in the kitchen, after preparation of the order, which is a sandwich or whatever, it will go to the delivery section from where it will be delivered to the customer. Now, this again sounds rather oversimplified. We have to be very detailed. And the reason I'm rubbing in the whole thing again and again, because I really want to draw your attention to the fact that we have to be extremely detailed. Upon the receipt of the call, somebody, the same person who receives the call will communicate the order to the kitchen, and he will do that with the help of some kind of document, because there are so many calls coming into the facility that the person receiving the calls will tend to forget what is the exact order. So with the help of a document which is kind of an evidence of the service which is being rendered, he will communicate the order specifications to the kitchen, where upon the completion of that particular order, again some kind of document will be generated to verify completion of the order before it is handed over to the delivery section. And again, some details will be put into the system just to make sure that the order delivered to the person is going to be delivered. And again, once the delivery person is back to the kitchen, some kind of information will be put into the system in order to provide the evidence that the order was delivered at the particular time it was supposed to be delivered. If it is not delivered at the time it was supposed to be delivered, it is a service failure, and we've got to do something about it in terms of recovery. And this again is something which should be part of the process, meaning the built-in process. If something goes wrong, then the following are the steps that we are supposed to be taking. Anyway, my point here is that the whole process detail is to be documented, and it is to be documented in terms of the marketing and sales, the points of interaction, the operations, the points of the preparation, and the delivery points in terms of the delivery, the mechanism. And during all this, we've got to follow all those points where quality is stressed and can be stressed. And the fact is that wherever we think quality is going to matter to the customer, which in this case is obviously the preparation of the food, we've got to pay extra attention to those steps. So after we have documented all those steps as kind of a process flow, we have to prepare the document, and in order to have total consensus from all those concerned about the delivery of the service, we have to present the document to them. Consensus will form the basis of implementation. Once we have achieved the consensus, then we are at the stage of implementing that. Now, implementation is going to take place in terms of testing the concept. We are not yet at the stage of testing the service itself. We are just testing the concept. And we test the concept with the help of employees and a few customers who we really can trust. What we do is we can stage exercises of order taking and execution of the same by receiving orders from our colleagues or customers, and then seeing that everything falls in place. In case there is some problem, we always can go for correction because we still are testing the service that we have just developed. This is something that we must do because it is not something tangible. It is an intangible service, which is the dominant part in relation to this example, and therefore we cannot test that in the form of sampling that we might do when we sell tangible goods. Since it is a service, it has to be designed very well. It has to be designed as a process flow, and then a consensus is to be achieved by all from across different functions who are part of that service in order to have their ownership into the delivery of that particular service. In the absence of that ownership, things will go wrong. And once we have achieved that, we involve employees and customers just in order to see that the idea which was generated in the first place has been translated into a viable concept, a viable service rather, and the service can be test marketed. This really takes us into the stage of the test marketing. Now we are all set for test marketing after having made sure that the concept is going to work, because the concept stands tested among our employees and customers. Now, test marketing again is a very challenging and interesting kind of a stage because of the character of intangibility and inseparability in particular. Why? Because this is not a tangible product that we are dealing with. We are dealing with services. I would like to rub that in again and again. And dealing with services, we have the constraint of not being able to produce a service beforehand. The meaning, consumption and production of service is going to take place at the same time and at the same place. Therefore, we just cannot be in a position to start producing services, store them somewhere, and then test them in a market of our choice as an isolated case. Because that really is the case when we are dealing with tangible goods. What happens is that we produce those tangible goods, store them, and then we wait for the appropriate time and in a market of our choice, which we think represents the global market that we are going to be dealing with, which in this case, let us suppose, is our national market. And we have chosen one particular city. We go there, test the market, do some sampling, generate some results, and come back to see whether the product has caught on or not. If there are certain corrections or adjustments or improvements to be made, we do that. Here in services, we are doing something else. We are dealing with something which is inseparable, and because of that inseparability, we have the constraint of producing the service beforehand. That's what I said. And because of that, we've got to test the service right at the same place where it is produced. Again, there is another constraint, and that is the constraint of distribution. In most of the cases, services are distributed from a limited number of points, barring some large banks, insurance companies, or the travel agencies. Huge travel agencies, we are constrained to have too many different distribution points. And there are a lot of cases where we have just about one distribution point. So what happens when it comes to testing the service from that particular one point? Well, I would say that even if we have more points than one, we still are constrained in terms of the testing the service from the same place where we are selling other services as well. So we only have one option left to us. Instead of start selling the service to anyone and everyone in the open market, we can exercise the option of selling the service as a test market case again to our employees and their families, because by selling the service first to them for a specific amount of time, we really can test the concept. I mean, we really can test the product, the actual service product, in order to see the operational smoothness or the lack of it into the operating system. I can give you an example from one of the banks in our country that launched its credit card among the employees first, just to see the operational smoothness. They tested the product for quite a bit of time before they launched that into the open market. So this is the one option which is available to service providers, and this is the one that really can work in the marketplace when it comes to testing the new service product. Even if it is a redesigned kind of a service, we have to follow the same process. So you will agree with me that most of the concepts that I'm talking about have been borrowed from marketing of the manufactured goods, but then it is the adaptations and certain variations and adjustments that we make to the concepts in order to fit those into the area of services. Let us now get on with the planning checklist and talk about the next step, which is that of commercialization. We have tested the service product, and we think it is going to be successful because we have debugged all that was bugging us, and this is the stage where the service product hits the market. Let it hit the market and do some sales. We are into the sales process, and it is two important objectives that we have to take into consideration, and we are not to lose sight of those. The one is that we must make sure that people involved in delivering the service are extremely enthusiastic about the sales of that particular service, despite the fact that we did involve everyone within the organization across different functions during the concept development stage and also during the service development stage. And while we tested the service, we again involved our colleagues just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Despite that, we can have problems of enthusiasm and motivation with our front-end employees. And if that happens to be the case, it is our duty to look into the causes of that problem. Internal and interactive marketing have to be exercised in order to make corrections. That is the essence of this particular objective. The second objective is that we've got to track sales and maintain all records in their entirety relating customers who are buying the new service. This is extremely important because we have to register with all the encounters, and you will recall that these encounters will lead us into carrying out research which will help us in future. For example, we might get leads into doing some kind of critical incident studies even to begin with. Even after we have launched the product, maybe the product is so good that the people are extremely satisfied beyond our expectations, and we are delighting them. In that case, we've got to find out the causes for that delightness. If the case is otherwise, again, we have to carry that out. So all I'm saying is that these are the two objectives that we have to keep in mind while we commercialize our service product. I would summarize these two objectives once again for your benefit. We have to make sure that the enthusiasm level of the front-end employees is very high, just like we envisioned when we introduced the service, or when we were talking with these people about the possibility of introduction of this particular service. The second objective is tracking sales and maintaining all records relating customers and their encounters with the company. This takes us to the final stage of the implementation and the seventh step of the planning list, and that is the post-introduction evaluation. This basically is the post-purchase behavior, and you will recall this is an extremely sensitive stage because this is where the future behavior of customers is molded, and therefore we've got to follow very rigorously all the developments that take place within this phase or at this particular stage. We've got to look into the operating efficiencies and the costing of the service and the revenues which are coming our way. That is the standpoint of the company's operations side. But then at the same time, we also have to look into the level of satisfaction and make sure that customers who have bought the new service do come back to us and become our loyal customers. This is an important objective of this particular phase, along with the one that I mentioned earlier. Although I did mention that earlier, but being very customer centered and focused, we have to be extremely sensitive with the need fulfillment dimension of our customers before we start looking into costs and operating efficiencies and things like that. But then the fact remains that as a commercial entity, we also have to look into those things and make corrections and adjustments to our costing, to pricing, and all those things that need some fine-tuning in order to make the service more efficient and more productive. Because if the service is efficient and productive, it is not only good for the company, it also is good for the customer, because an efficient service is going to bring the customers back to us over and over again. So this is a step which is extremely important and has to be institutionalized in terms of making adjustments to the variables of marketing mix. And when I talk about these variables, I'm talking about all 7 variables, meaning the traditional 4 Ps along with the 3 Ps which characterize our services marketing. We may have to put in more people, or we may have to reduce people. We may have to do something with the physical evidence, or we may have to do something with the process in order to make it more efficient and more productive. So whatever changes are to be made or adjustments that are to be carried out in terms of the variables of marketing mix, we have to do that as quickly as we can, because this is a stage where we are going to make our customers either loyal to us or kind of disloyal, and the objective is obvious. With this, we are done with the planning checklist of the service design, meaning the service design of a new product. Now I'm going to talk about another topic which is very closely related to service design. As a matter of fact, that really is the essence of service design, and something which you will realize after I've talked about the whole thing, that you really can put that into the concept stage and then further get into details when you start developing the service and testing it. And in other words, after I've talked about this particular topic, you will like to take it back to the planning checklist. And this is the concept of service blueprinting, and we have to understand what this is all about. Well, let me tell you that those of you who already have done a course on operations management or something similar are going to find it very easy, because this basically is all about process flow, meaning defining the complete process with the help of activities divided into so many different tasks as a continuous flow. And those who have not done any course like that are not going to find it difficult either. So let's talk about what blueprinting is all about. Just like in manufactured goods, a product is introduced with a lot of deliberate planning and design with very stringent specifications. Services also have to be designed in a very well-planned way, before those are introduced to the marketplace. And this kind of designing, the meaning blueprinting, is carried out just in order to make sure that whatever we are conceiving and trying to implement is absolutely complete. It has no vagueness, it is very precise, and it is very objective, and it is owned by each and everyone within the organization, meaning all those people who are the decision makers, so that nobody can say at a later stage, I never agreed with this particular concept. So what we do is we come up with a portrayal of a system which shows the whole process. And that process shows all the relationships between the front-end employees and customer. And with the definition of those roles, what we do is we show those activities on that process flow. Not just activities, but activities divided into so many different tasks. And I would like to take you back to the example of the direct delivery, which we intended doing out of the restaurant that we owned. And I was talking about so many different steps. Either we follow the approach of oversimplification in the hope that everybody understands that and leave everything to the imagination of people, whereas the other option is that we become very systematic. And by being so, we portray all those relationships that form the whole process and the activities that form the backbone of the process in such a systematic way on a piece of paper that everybody understands their roles and the points of interaction and all those processes that are to be carried out in order to deliver the service. So in other words, it shows the interaction between the front-end employees and the customers. It also shows the interaction between and among employees, and it also depicts the processes which are there to support the delivery of the service. I'm going to show you in a few moments the graphical presentation of a service blueprint. But before that, just a few more words. In order to fully understand blueprinting in its entirety, so that we come up with something totally complete and accurate, we've got to understand that there are a few components to the blueprinting, and those are basically 4 in number. The first and the foremost component is the customer's actions. Number 2 component is on-stage actions by employees, and number 3 is backstage actions by employees, whereas the 4th component of blueprinting is processes. Now, what these components are, let us talk about these one by one before I show you the presentation. Well, customer actions are the choices, the steps, or the activities undertaken by customers. A customer walking into a courier service hands over the package he wants to send overseas or to some other town within the country. The action taken by the customer is walking into the facility and then filling up the information which he's supposed to fill up, if the system works like that. There are certain couriers who would like you to fill up the information by yourself before you present the package to them. And the reason I would like to highlight this step is because if this is the case, then it is an added step. However, if the case is otherwise, meaning if you are just supposed to walk into the front-end employee and hand over the package to him for him to put all the details into the system by himself, it is another case, and it is a little different kind of an interaction. It is a step less. The point here is that all those actions which are taken by the customer while customer appears at the service scape are the customer actions. Another example could be that of a customer who walks into a medical facility. Again, just for the sake of oversimplified example, I would say going to the doctor and then coming back with the prescription is an oversimplified way of talking about the service. Meaning that when we talk about the whole thing from a service standpoint, then this is not enough. We've got to be very, very detailed. It all starts with seeking an appointment from the doctor, and then showing up at the facility, and before the pre-consulting occurrence, the patient has to undergo a few tests, routine tests like checking of the blood pressure, the weight, the height by the nursing staff before you show up before the doctor. And then after the consulting is over, you again go back to the nursing staff to get some reports and get the further information on future appointments. Now the question is, who does those future appointments? And again, going back to the nursing staff that was involved in doing things, which were pre-consulting things, everything has got to be taken into account. Everything has got to be portrayed on the blueprint as a certain task. Because unless we do that, we will not know how many people we need and what are going to be the relationships between those staff members and the patient, or what are going to be the relationships between and among those staff members. The whole service has got to be portrayed in a manner that we start with the customer actions, and anything you see which is related with the customer action has got to be shown in the first place. So the blueprinting starts with the customer's actions. That is something that we have to keep in mind. Let us now talk about the second component, which is about on-stage employee actions. Well, these are the actions taken by the employees, and the actions which I talked in relation to the customer's actions are the ones which are taken by the employees as the points of interaction. Whenever customer takes an action, there is an action part of the employee also, and when that happens, there is an interaction, and that is something that we're going to see. In the example of the courier, you can think to yourselves that anything done by the employee, meaning the front-end employee, while he puts in the relevant information into the system, is one action which is taken by the on-stage staff or the on-stage employees. The third component is that of backstage actions by the employees. Now, these are the actions which are not really visible to customers and are undertaken by those staff members who are not visible to the customer, meaning they are the staff members who are either sitting in the back office, or even if they are sitting somewhere where they are visible, their actions are not directly related with the interaction which is taking place at that particular moment. Anything which employees do in terms of the sorting different packages and putting further information into the system about pricing and weights and so on and so forth are the things which are done backstage, and that is why those actions are known as backstage actions. The importance of all these components is that we are dividing different activities into different levels, just in order to make sure that all the activities are divided into those tasks which are not omitted from the flow of the process and processes, because one missing link or one missing point is going to be the one less important activity, and that is going to be the broken chain. And that is something which we do not want, and that is why we get down to the exercise of coming up with a blueprint of the whole process. The fourth component, which is the processes, well, I think this goes without saying that all the processes which are carried out in support of the service are the ones which are defined as processes in terms of there being a component of the service blueprinting. In case of the medical check, all the tests and diagnostics which take place in the lab within the hospital are the processes which support the service, and the customer never sees those processes. Likewise, all those processes which take place within the courier service in terms of sorting and loading different packages into different bags in terms of the destination and further transportation to the airport or wherever, are the ones which support the delivery of the service and should be the ones and are the ones that you take into consideration while you put all those onto the blueprint. The basic objective is that we portray, we depict all those tasks onto the blueprint. Now, with all these components of blueprinting clear to us, let us now go to a presentation which is going to show us how to come up with a service blueprinting. This is an example in relation to a courier, and you can see from this blueprint that everything starts at the top most level, which is the level of customer. The customer walks into the facility and we show that as a step, and then customer fills up the details, because this is supposed to be a process where customer himself is supposed to come up with all those details, so that people who are putting the information into the system do not make any mistakes. This also happens to be a safety valve, so that you do not really have to come up with a recovery strategy, and therefore shows involvement, meaning more involvement on part of the customer, and that is why it appears to be an added step here. Now, after he has filled up all the details, he hands over the package to the frontline employee, and he weighs that package, and after the weight is done, he again enters certain information into the system. Now, what is important and very interesting here is after he has entered the information, we see a link developing here going right underneath into the process info box. Now, this is a kind of a centralized information processing system, if there is one there, and if the courier service happens to be a large one to have that kind of system, the information is being processed there the moment it is entered at the front. And also you can see the package that is weighed by the front-end employee that goes further down, and it is collected by the staff which is responsible for doing some sorting, which again is the next step. And after the sorting is done, the package goes to the next stage, which is that of loading, and loading is done in terms of the different destinations, meaning in terms of different cities of the country and also of the world. And from there we get on to the next step, which is loading of those packets or bundles onto the truck for further transportation to the airport or wherever. Now, after the information at the second stage was entered by the staff into the computer, he created a receipt, handed over that to the customer, which you can again see at the very top level in the box which says gives receipt. Once the customer has gotten the receipt, made the payment, the customer walks away. At the customer walking out of the facility, it is the end of the process in terms of the customer, but it may not be the end of the process in terms of the service provider. There are many things which are to be done in terms of the processes, and those processes are shown at the last stage, as you can see, in shape of boxes, and this is something which is supporting the whole transaction that took place between the company and the customer. So these are the four different levels of the service blueprint, and a kind of a flow of a process which you can develop in relation to any service of your choice and your liking. As a matter of fact, I would like you guys to come up with something like this for your own education, and I also would like to point out one very important fact here, that this is a depiction of an extremely simple and fundamental nature. What you are supposed to be doing, exploding each and every activity into any number of imaginable steps which you think should be undertaken by the staff within the company, because by undertaking those steps, the process flow is going to be made foolproof, and process flow is going to be made as something which will ensure quality, meaning quality service. And since delivery of service is a continual program of improvements, these steps could have to be taken into very serious consideration once and for all. Now, after having taken a look at this slide, let me now talk about the different four levels that you just saw on this portrayal. As you will recall, you saw the first level, which is the customer's actions, and that is where you have seen what they call the line of visibility. And underneath you saw what they call the line of interaction, and right down below you saw what is the line of processes. What are these lines, and why these they show themselves as different levels is something that I'm going to talk about right now. The top level is depicted by the line of interaction because that signifies the interaction that takes place between the customer and the front-end employee. This is extremely simple and something which you already must be thinking about, and these are the points which must be flashing into your mind, but for the sake of clarity, for the sake of completeness and accuracy, I've got to jot down all these points for you to be very clear about the objectives that I'm talking about. Another feature of this print is that we can see an interaction take place between the employee and the customer. And that really is shown with the help of a vertical line. As you will recall from this particular slide, when information is being processed, or rather when the package is handled to the employee, you see the vertical line, and that vertical line signifies interaction between the front-end employee and the customer. Likewise, all those vertical lines which you see underneath are the portrayal of interactions which take place between employees in order to complete the service process. Anyway, back to the line of interaction, it is very clear to all of us. It is the line which divides the customer action and the actions of the employees which are done on stage, meaning between the customers and the employees, and this is something which is extremely visible to the customer. On stage, the actions are the ones which the company has to decide the nature of and the kind of and their exhibition of. In the meaning, it is upon the company to decide how many actions they should show to the customer, meaning all those tasks which should be visible to the customer is a decision which is based on company's discretion. Now, this discretionary exercise has to be very rational and very logical. Let me give you one example from the food area. You walk into so many cafes and coffee shops and see so many things being done right in front of you. Actually, it is a deliberate effort on part of the service providers to do as many things in terms of cooking and frying in front of the customers because they want to give the evidence of service to the customers in the most convincing way. On the one hand, you can say that the company is very hygiene oriented. They're extremely neat and clean because all those things that could have taken place backstage in a dirty kitchen are being done right in front of us. And the other view of this situation could be, and rather is, that this is a deliberate action on part of the company just to give the customers a very convincing evidence of the delivery of service. And that is why you see extremely modern coffee shops at airports, in shopping malls, and in other parts of the city, and they are full of the kind of service evidence which I have just talked about. And if that is the case, the number of tasks that you should design and show on this blueprint is going to be higher. So we know where those actions go. They belong to the area which is signified as on-stage area, because these are the actions to be taken by employees on stage before the customer, meaning in front of the customer, and he sees all those actions. And this area is between the line of interaction and the line of visibility, meaning below the line of interaction and above the line of visibility. What is the line of visibility? Well, this is a horizontal line which divides the on-stage actions from backstage actions. And backstage actions, as you already know, are the ones which are undertaken by employees that are not really visible to customers. The next horizontal line is the line that signifies the processes, and anything that goes on below this line is the one that I talked in quite a lot of detail. And processes are all those steps and activities which are undertaken by employees in support of the service delivery. What is important to see here is the relationship between horizontal lines of the four components and the vertical lines which cross those horizontal lines. And like I said earlier, the vertical lines, wherever they cross the horizontal lines, signify one point of interaction. Either it is between the employees and the customers, or it is between employees. So we have seen in quite a bit of the detail as to how this is to be designed, although I will be talking about all those steps and a checklist which we have to take into consideration just to make sure that we are coming up with the right kind of service blueprint. But these are the fundamentals that I have just talked about, and what it really shows is how many actions that are required in order to complete a service, and how many people are there who are going to render that particular service, and what are the kind of relationships between and among those people who work together to deliver that service, and how many people should be attending to customer, or in what sequence the front-end employees should be attending to the requirement of the customer are some of the things which you must show on the service blueprint, because it then becomes the basis of so many different vital decisions. Because when you talk about all these different steps, you're talking about your strategies. I mean, it has its implications in human resource, how many people you need, and it has its implications in terms of the training programs. You need to develop people in the operations area, in the marketing and sales area, and in the area of receiving supplies and delivering, executing orders and transporting orders, and so on and so forth. So all these steps are going to have a strategic implication, and therefore we've got to be very, very detailed about developing a service blueprint. Again, another thing which I would like to summarize is the reading of the service blueprint. If somebody else has prepared it for you, you can read it horizontally, and you also may read it vertically. When you read the blueprint horizontally, what you are looking at is the actions of the customer to begin with, and all those actions on part of the employees on stage, backstage, and the processes which are required to be undertaken to respond to the customer's requirement, meaning in response to the purchase of your service by the customer. If you read it vertically, you basically look into the relationships of interaction between the employees and the customers, and interaction among employees in order to deliver the service. So this is kind of a summary which is going to help you design an accurate service blueprint, and the kind of steps which you must ensure in order to come up with just about the right blueprint are the following. And I would call it a checklist of planning a service blueprint. In the first place, you must identify the process. Well, the fact is that you are into business and you know the kind of service that you should be developing. The only thing is that you have to come up with the right most design of the service. And the last few lectures have been about designing the right most kind of service. And there are so many considerations that we deal with in order to come up with the right design. So all I'm saying is that you have to identify the right process which starts with the customer. The second point of the checklist is that you must identify the customer, meaning in which segment the customer belongs. The thing is that different segments need to be dealt with in a different way in terms of a service blueprint. You know why? Because they have different requirements. And we have been talking so much about customization. And I just gave you an example of starting a direct delivery service in addition to the dining area. And whenever you are dealing with a different service, with different features, you are dealing with a different segment. that segment may have very similar demographic characteristics. That is besides the point. The point is that you are offering a redesign or an altogether new service which has a different kind of dynamics, and in light of those dynamics you have to pick the right segment because you are dealing with that one particular segment. If it is a question of dealing with another segment, you might as well come up with another service with a blueprint. And what you can do is, if you have different blueprints, you can join them by creating the touch points, meaning those points of interaction where different kinds of services are related. And as a matter of fact, the different kinds of services are going to be related in terms of so many different backstage actions and processes when employees start taking into consideration all the financials or the purchasing from that point of view, because that is something that has to be taken into consideration in its total integration. And that is what I meant by keeping your focus on the customer in relation to the segment he is in. So that is planning the checklists, point number 2. Point number 3 is that you have to map all actions starting with the customer, because it is at the initiation of the customer that you set the whole process into action. So starting with customer initiating the process, you get down to the whole process with all the tasks that you must be putting into the blueprint. And the 4th step is that you map contact employees. You map contact employees who are going to be interacting with the customer, meaning all those employees who are part of the on-stage actions, because the on-stage actions are the ones which follow customers' initiation, and you've got to be extremely detailed in that. After you have mapped the contact employees, you then map all those employees who are going to perform the backstage actions. And after the backstage actions are taken into consideration, you get to the final point number 6, which is that you add the evidence of service. This is an extremely significant point of the checklist, because you need to have the evidence not in order to show it to the customer or give it to the customer. You also need it for certain internal controls. And at the end of every important step, you must be able to generate some kind of a document which signifies the completion of that particular task. And again, I would say from the standpoint of making sure that every task adds to the quality of the delivery of service, we've got to take into consideration all these steps in terms of the delivery evidence. In other words, we've got to see where is the point of cutoff or the point of culmination where a new document should be generated to the benefit of the employees of the company or to the benefit of the company as a whole. So these are the points of the planning checklist for the service blueprint. And like I told you earlier, you will agree with me, after having been educated on service blueprinting, it is something which should be the part of the service development and testing. You just cannot develop the service without having a detailed blueprint, and you cannot test it. And when you test it with the help of employees and customers and make certain adjustments and corrections, go back to the blueprint and do something with the steps. Either you add a few steps or you delete the one step or more steps, or you add something in terms of recovery strategies. If you can build those into the process to begin with, it is going to be beneficial. And you may show that as kind of a supplement to the main blueprint, which is about the core service. And only in case of things going wrong, you pick up the threads from the recovery planning section, and on the basis of that well-designed system of recovery strategies, you immediately respond by being very adaptable and responsible, although being systematic, of course, but within the parameters of that system, by also being adaptable and responsive to the customer, so that you know what is it that you're supposed to be doing in order to be responsive. Well, This is all about the service, the blueprinting so far. The next the steps about the blueprinting in terms of the questions, the further questions that we must ask ourselves in terms of being a little more philosophical and methodological at the same time, and the benefits of the service blueprinting. I'm going to talk about those in the next lecture. I would like to thank you for the attendance and look forward to talking with you again in lecture number 27. Allah Hafiz until then.